Okay, this video is going to walk you through a couple of very simple examples of how to create nested loops. So before you watch this video, hopefully you've seen each of the loops videos in the prior chapter and also had some practice maybe with the batch processing examples. Anyway, so here's what I want you to do. Go ahead and open, hit Alt F11 or open your VBA editor through the Developer tab. Here we are. Let's fit this guy right here in the screen. Okay, so let's click on our document that we're currently working on. Here we go, VBA project book 1. Make sure you don't click on solver or this one or anything else that you might have open, but click on book 1 and insert module. Option explicit up here always shows up at the top. If you don't have it in, feel free to write that in. Let's go ahead and do a sub nested loop, and let's start with for loops. Alright, so let's create a couple of variables. Dim r as integer, c as integer, and then let's create a for loop. What I want to do is make move this over here, give us some room. I'm actually going to resize these columns to give us a bit more room to work with on this smaller screen. Okay, there we go. Alright, so what I want is to write the numbers 1 through 10. There we go. Or no, let's begin with 10 ones going down the page. So column A, just write the number 1 right here in rows 1 through 10. So this is a pretty simple loop. Let's start with a for loop for r equals 1. Now remember, with a for loop, we're initializing the value of r right here in the for statement. 2, 10. Come down here and hit next. Also keep in mind that by default, what happens is every time, well actually let me show you. Hit either F8 or Command Shift I. Alright, F8. And this goes into break mode. Go in here, as soon as I process this line, notice that down here in my locals window, R is going to change to 1 as soon as I process that. There we go, because the yellow highlighter shows what's going to be processed the next time you hit or step into the program or hit Command Shift I on a Mac or F8 on a PC. The keyword next is going to step or increment the for loop. So next will automatically make R go to 2. Notice I just hit F8 again, and now down the locals window R just changed to 2. Hit it again, R is 3, 4. Every time I process that next, it's going to keep adding 1 to R. Now don't forget, I can change this and tell it, I'm going to hit stop on this, to step 2, which means move by 2. So F8 or Command Shift I, now R is 1, and now each time I hit F8 it's jumping by 2 each time until it ends. Or I can also step -3, I can do whatever I want. However, we're going to leave it to this default step 1. What I want here is to say cells. Now the cells command is looking for 2 numbers. A number to represent the row that you're referring to and a number to represent the column you're referring to. So if I put in 1, 1, that refers to cell A1, right? So I can say cells 1, 1.value equals 1. Now if I do that, let me come over here and delete all these. All that's going to happen is it's going to put the number 1 in A1 10 times. So notice R is set to 1, C is set to 0, but all I'm doing is saying I've hard-coded the numbers 1, 1, which is cell A1. I'm putting the number 1 in there, and I'm doing that 10 times. Alright, that doesn't help. What I want to do is put that number 1 down each one of these rows right here. Well, to do that, I'm going to, instead of using the number 1 here, I'm going to replace this with a variable r, because r changes each time through the loop. So function F8, let's go back into this. At this point, r is now equal to 1, therefore this is referring to 1, 1, A1. So I hit F8 again, it puts the number 1 in A1. As soon as I hit next, R now changes to 2. So if I process this line again, it's referring not to A1 anymore, but to A2, because this first spot here refers to the row. So as I keep hitting F8, it's going to keep adding 1 to R and keep putting adding the number 1 another row down. Okay, so we're halfway there. What I want to do next is make a function that'll now put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 across the columns. And then I want to go down to the next row and do the same thing, so that what we have is 10 rows of the number 1 through 10 printed out. Okay, not a problem. Here's how we do that. Let's stop this. Let's clear my sheet. Back over here. I'm going to add another for loop right here. For C equals 1 to 10. Whoops, there we go. Next. And let's move this cells command right here up into the nested loop. So I have a loop fully inside of another loop. Now I've named this R and this C, but just because I named it R doesn't mean this number represents a row, or because I said this is a C, it doesn't mean it represents a column. R only represents a row when I use it right here in the cells command, where it's expecting a number to represent the row. I could have named this purple monkey dishwater and then refer to this as for purple monkey dishwater equals 1 to 10, and then use the name purple monkey dishwater right here, and it's going to still refer to this as a row. So it doesn't matter how I name this. It can be named R or whatever I want. So what do I do next? If I start hitting F8, it's going to step inside here, and on this line I'm going to now set C. I've set R equal to 1. Now I set C equal to 1. I haven't changed this line, so it's still going to put the number 1 into A1. When I hit next, this next is aligned or attached or refers to this inside for loop. So this line next here is going to add 1 to C, not to R. So hit F8 again. And now if you look down the locals window, you see C equals 2. Well, as soon as I hit play, as soon as I continue to step through with F8, it's still just plugging the number 1 into cell A1, because I haven't changed R yet. All I'm doing is cycling through C, and I've just been changing C. Now that I've made it all the way through this inner loop, it went back to the outer loop and started over and changed R to 2. So I'm going to hit F8 again, and now it's going to put 1 down in A2. But notice as I hit F8 another 10 times, all it's doing is putting the number 1 in cell A2 10 times, until finally I get to where C is now 11, which means it stops and goes to the outer loop. Now that we're on the outer loop, it's going to add 1 to R. Now R is 3, and it goes back inside the inner loop, and it's going to put 1 in A3 10 times. So how do we need to modify this so that it adds the numbers 2, 3 through 7 on the rest of the line? Well, let's stop this. Instead, let's change this number 1 to the variable C. Now hit F8, and notice here R is set to 1, C is 1. So this is going to put the value of 1 in cell A1, which it does, but now it adds 1 to C. So now, because I put a variable C there in the cells command, it's referring to column B, but still row 1. R still hasn't changed. It's still at number 1, because all I did was process this next right here, and I'm going to keep incrementing 1 to C until I'm done going 1 through 10 on the inner loop. Then I'll go back to the outer loop and add 1 to R. So look over there in the Excel sheet, I'm putting the number 1 across 10 columns. Well, then I finally process the outer loop, and then I go back into the inner loop, and R is now 2, so it's putting the number 2 across 10 columns. Keep going. Okay, now the C is to 11, so it's quit the inner loop and it's gone back to the outer loop. It's added another 1 to R, and it just keeps going. So what's the last change we need to make so that it's not putting the same number 1 in everything? Pause it and see if you can figure it out. Hopefully you figured out to put the variable C right here instead of 1. And now what will happen? F8. It comes in here, puts 1 in A1, but now that we've added 1 to C, it's going to put the number 2, because C is now 2. It's going to put 2 in row 1, column 2, which is B1. So see the Excel spreadsheet over there change, putting all the numbers in, going back to the outer loop, putting the next ones in. I'll just hit play and it finishes out. So here's an example of a nested for loop. So I can actually nest a do loop inside of a for, or a for loop inside of a do. I don't have to have both the same type of loops to do nesting. But let's do another example now and do the exact same thing, but this time let's do it with do loops. So come down here, let's make a new sub nested loop do. Alright, let's make our variables again. Dim r as integer, c as integer. Now, we're going to have to do this a little bit different. This is one case where for loops are actually a bit more useful than do loops. Do loops will take a little bit longer to do the same thing, but they still work fine. And in an introductory course like ours, as long as you meet the requirements and get it working, that's what we care about. As you improve your VBA skills over time, you can start worrying about making things quicker or using fewer lines of code. But for now, we'll just be happy if you can make the requirements of a problem work. So don't worry about the fact that do loops will take a little bit more effort here. Anyway, let me show you how this is going to work. So, should we use a do while or do until? Either one will work perfectly fine. In class today I did do while, so I guess in this video I'm going to do a do until just to mix it up. So, do until. What goes next here is some criteria that gets evaluated as either a true or a false. And with a do until, we want to do until something is true. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll say do until r equals 11. As soon as r equals 11, stop and don't go inside of this loop. So that's why it's 11 and not 10, because if I say do until r equals 10, it'll stop at 9. So I could have done this a few different ways. I could have said do until r is greater than or equal. I'll just stick with equals 11 and make it simpler. Okay, next. Now before you hit play, watch me first. I'm going to hit F8 and go into my program. And it says do until r equals 11. Well, what is r right now? Look down there in my locals window. R is set to 0. Okay, so it loops. However, r is still 0. As I keep hitting F8, it keeps going back into the loop. I've created an infinite loop. Why? Because the keyword loop doesn't automatically add one or take one away from r. We have to do that ourselves in the code of the do loop. Also, we don't have this statement up like we do up above where it says for r equals 1. Right here, this is assigning a value to r. This isn't assigning a value to r. This is just saying, is this true? Does r equal 11? And it's returning false because no, it doesn't. Whereas up here, I'm actually assigning a value to r and to c. So in the do loop example, before I ever go into the loop, I need to do two things. First, I need to give r a value. So right here I'm going to say before the loop that r equals 1. Also, before I do anything else, I need to increment this loop. I need to make a way that at some point this condition will be evaluated as true and the loop will quit. Otherwise it'll go on forever. So at the end of whatever business I'm doing in the loop, I'm going to put r equals r plus 1. Now if you have experience in other programming languages, you might be asking, well, can we do this? That's something other languages will use. Or can we do this? Unfortunately, no. VBA doesn't accept either of those shortcuts for this common technique we're doing right here. We have to actually spell out r equals r plus 1. Okay, now let's test our loop again. F8 or Command-Shift-I if you're on a Mac. R is now set to 1. It doesn't equal 11, therefore it will go into the loop. Adds 1 to r, loops, still evaluated as false, so it goes back into the loop again. Keeps going back into the loop. And let me pause so you can see r updating. R is now 10. R is not 11, so it is going to go into the loop one last time. Adds 1 to r, loops. Now it's 11, so it's going to skip the inside the loop and go straight to the end of the sub. Or it'll go to whatever is next after that loop statement. But since we have nothing, it goes to the end. Alright, let's stop this. Let's put in our code. Cells just like we did above. R, 1 dot value equals 1. So let's test our outer loop so far, and I highly suggest you follow this same technique on the exam and in real life. Before you go and add your nested loop inside, just test your outer loop and make sure everything's working. So F8, let's go inside here, it's going to put the value of 1 in A1. Now we add 1 to R, goes back inside the loop. So now it's going to put the value of 1 in A2, and it's going to work as expected. Play it, and it puts 1 and everything in the column A. Alright, so far so good. Now let's add another loop. Do until C equals 11. And let's loop. Okay, this statement right here that adds 1 or puts a value in a cell, just like up above, this now needs to go inside this nested inner loop. However, the line here that increments R needs to stay outside of the inner loop. Why? Because we want to keep adding 1 to the rows and adding 1 to the columns. And if we were to put R equals R plus 1 inside of here, R is eventually going to get to 100 because it's going to keep adding 1 onto R 10 times for all 10 rows. 10 times 10 is 100. We want this line to stay out here, so we only increment the row when we change rows, not every time we change or add 1 to a column. So this loop is also going to need its own kill switch, or its own incrementer. Instead of here, I'm going to say C equals C plus 1, and we're almost there. Now if you look up above, you'll remember, hey, we had to add this C here and add a C here. Okay, we're almost there. It's not quite done. Let me show you what this is going to do. Back here, delete. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. There we go. F8. We go inside. R is set to 1. Okay, R is not 11. Now do until C equals 11. Okay, C is 0 initially. So what problem am I going to run into as soon as I process this line? It's going to try to put the value of 0 in cell 1, 0. Well, there is no column 0, so as soon as I hit F8, error, runtime error. A runtime error is an error where the code itself, there's nothing wrong with my syntax. Nothing is turned red in here like it does when you've misspelled a function or something. But once the program started running, I tried to do something that can't be done. In particular, I tried to put a value in column 0 which doesn't exist. So what do I need to do? I need to set C equal to 1. Now if I put it here, this solves that problem, but it doesn't solve another. Let me show you. F8, set R to 1, C to 1. R is not equal to 11, so I go inside. C is not 11, so I go inside. Now it puts 1 in cell A1 like it should, adds 1 to C, and I'm off and running. So far so good. Okay, well let's continue here. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now I hit loop, C is now 11, and I stop because C is now 11, and it skips, and now I'm going to add 1 to R. I'm going to shift from row 1 to row 2. Still so far so good. R is not 11, so I'm going to go back inside, and now it's time to put 1 in cell A2, but the problem is C is still at 11, so it skips this loop, and all it does is add 1 to R, and I keep skipping the inner loop because C is always 11. What do I need to do? I need to reset C each time through the outer loop so that the inner loop will run, which means I'm going to come right here before the inner loop begins but after the outer loop begins and set C equal to 1 so that each time through it'll reset C to 1 and it'll continue to go into the inner loop. Now you might notice this makes our other line right here obsolete. Let me show you why. If I hit F8, R is 1, C is 1, do until, R is not 11, so it goes inside. C is already 1, and now it's about to set C equal to 1 again. Not a big deal. I'd still give you this problem full credit if this was your answer. However, I have a wasted line, and so I'm going to get rid of this one right here. Since no matter what, the first time through the loop, it's always going to still process this line, I may as well just delete the C equals 1 out here and just rely on this one. So let's try it out now. R is 1, not 11, so it goes inside. C is now 1. C is not 11, so it goes inside, puts 1 in A1, adds 1 to C. Let's keep going here. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I've added 1 to C. which means it now leaves the inner loop. Well, it's going to it's going to check this condition again, which is now evaluated as true, therefore it skips that loop, goes back to continuing its serial processing. So it does this line, then the loop, and now that it's done with that loop, it's going to go to this line. So processes, adds 1 to R, it loops, R is not 11, so it goes back inside, and before I go to that inner loop, C is now reset back to 1. So now I can go back inside the inner loop again. Let's just hit play, let this thing finish out, and there we go. So here's 2 examples of nested loops, fors and do's. Like I said before, there's no problem with putting a for loop inside of a do loop or vice versa. You can go as many nested levels of loops deep as you want. I've rarely found a situation where I've ever needed to go 3 nested loops deep. Kind of reminds me of that DiCaprio movie, what is it? A dream inside of a dream inside of a dream. It gets crazy. You don't want to do it, basically, as soon as you start having too many nested loops. But a single nested loop or a double loop is a very useful thing. Watch the next video to see a real-life example.